McGeough. As you can see from the bushes behind me and the blossoms on them, we are in the month of May, which is May 2023. And 100 years ago, in May 1923, the Irish Civil War came to an end. A very tragic time, a tragic period in our history, and for many, many thousands of our people, also a great tragedy. Now, the Civil War has been well documented. A lot of historical analysis has gone into it, and there's practically nothing more to say other than from time to time little anecdotes, little bits of stories come to the fore which give us perhaps another angle to it, or something which happened or what might have happened in relation to people who were involved but didn't quite make the history books. One of these relates to this piece of wood that I'm holding here. Now, to all intents and purposes, it is what it is, which is a section of skirting board. And this particular piece of wood was given to me 20 years ago in 2003. A friend of mine living in Sandymount in Dublin, which is where I was living at the time, was renovating his house ahead of putting it on the market. And in so doing, he was pulling off skirting boards. And then he found a section of part of the skirting board, and there was writing on it. And the writing was in pristine condition at the time because it had been nailed to the wall for 80 years. So for the first time in 80 years, this writing was made available and could be read. He contacted me, he knew my background, he knew my interest in history, and gave me this piece of wood. Now, what's written on it is very interesting. It is 3 names, 1 woman and 2 men. They give their addresses, or in 2 cases they give their addresses, but one of them describes himself as a staff captain in the IR.A, his name being Amon Ó Duffy, and it is, the date on it is the 7th of June 1923. And also he writes a small caption saying, "God save the Irish Republic." Now, that's very important because the Civil War had ended only a matter of weeks earlier. I'm assuming that this individual, Amon Ó Duffy, was, given from what he has written, I presume that he was on the Republican side, which is de facto the losing side in that particular Civil War. And I'm imagining that the people with him were Republican sympathizers. One of the ironies is that the house in which this skirting board was found was built at the time for veterans of the First World War, for British Army veterans who had been wounded or gassed in the First World War. And to add to all the various ironies, that particular house had a style which could best be described as German, and it would not have looked out of place in a suburb in Munich. But in any case, this man, who is obviously a member of the IR.A, may have been, I don't know, may have been a carpenter or a joiner, and with what has happened in the previous weeks, the ending of the Civil War and the shattering of all the ideals that he had fought for, he probably felt that he wanted to leave some memento, some act of defiance, but he couldn't do it openly, given that there were executions taking place, imprisonments and de facto deportations. It was a very discriminatory time for Irish Republicans. So they wrote this down on the back, as you'll be able to examine it in detail later, no doubt. They've written it down on the back of the skirting board and nailed it to the wall. And I held on to it for 20 years. Now, when I first got it, it was in pristine condition because it hadn't been exposed to the elements for 80 years at that stage. And I've just noticed recently that it's beginning to weather. So I was concerned that we perhaps could lose the writing, it might fade, and the histories and all that go with it, and the names and so forth. So I contacted Eamon O'Queeve, who's an old friend of mine. He's also the grandson of Eamon de Valera, who was heavily involved in the Republican side during the Civil War and went on to form Fianna Fáil and became effectively Taoiseach and eventually president in the Free State. So Eamon suggested I contact the National Museum, put me in touch with the lady there, and she is willing to take this piece of wood. They will see to it that it is perfectly preserved, or properly preserved, and kept in the archives. So I'm going to donate it to the Irish nation, and it's been an honour for me to have been its custodian for the last 20 years. I should point out also that one of the reasons that I am particularly attached to this piece of wood is because the night or the day that I received it, earlier that same day, I had been fired from a very good job as a teacher in a private school in Dublin. And the reason I was fired is because someone made a phone call to the school, and I had a fairly senior position in it at that stage. And they said that I was an ex-Republican prisoner, having been in prison in the United States for gun running activities way back in the 1980s. I was told by the managerial staff that, you know, I was the best man for the job, I was doing a great job, working wonders for the school, but they couldn't possibly hold on to me since I had been an Irish Republican prisoner in the United States, and I was effectively fired. And that's why I remember that particular day so well. And also, there's a certain empathy because I was being discriminated against by virtue because I was an Irish patriot, because I had fought for my country. I was trying to raise guns to get back to fight the British, to ship them back. And I should have been probably, I felt, given a job as patriots in other countries would be, and given a medal and all the rest of it. But no, we were just kicked out and treated like dirt effectively. And I empathised with these people because 80 years earlier they were in a similar position. And I can imagine that this man who signed himself, this volunteer who signed his name, may have faced serious discrimination had he come out openly and said who he was. And perhaps in due course he did, and hopefully somewhere along the line some historian will research their names, find out what became of them. Did the lady whose name is here, did she marry one of the two men, or did all of them go to the United States as many Irish Republicans did? What became of them? I'm hoping that some historian will do some research, some historian from the Dublin area perhaps, do research into these names, into these people, like who were they and what became of them. Did the lady whose name is here, did she marry one of the two men? Did all three of them perhaps head off to the United States because they were forced to do so? As it happened at that time, thousands, literally thousands of Irish Republican activists had to leave Ireland. They were discriminated against, they were persecuted, and they went to the United States. And were three, or one of these three, or all three of them amongst that exodus? That's what I'd like to know, and hopefully that'll come to the fore in the period ahead. And you know, a lot of Irish Republicans, like Michael Flannery, was among those who had to flee to the United States, and they spent decades out there. Some of them never returned to Ireland, but they were there for the 1970s, late 60s and 70s, when the Troubles broke out in the north. We are, of course, here in Tyrone at the moment, and this was one of the epicentres of the recent conflict that we had to try and get the British out of our country once and for all. And I wonder, did any of them ever meet up, perhaps with Mike Flannery? Did they know him? Because he became de facto the patriarch of Irish America, and as a man whom I met and have tremendous respect for. He was a very honourable, decent man, and I can only imagine that the people of that generation, like these three, were similarly great patriots, honourable and decent people. As a matter of fact, another interesting aside to all that is that a first cousin of my paternal grandmother, who was born just a few fields from where we are standing here right now, he was heavily involved in the IR.A. in the 1920s struggle. And Liam Lynch, who was General Liam Lynch, who was a chief of staff during the Civil War on the Republican side, asked him and a number of others to go to Europe to see if they could find field artillery and mountain artillery in order to set up a republic in the Munster area and defend it in the mountains with that type of artillery. He had gone there, and I believe they had achieved their goal insofar as they were able to attain the material that they wanted. But by that stage, Liam Lynch had been shot, he died, and the Civil War effectively, the Republican struggle, came to an end a few weeks later in May of 1923. So a matter of days afterwards, these people wrote "God Save the Irish Republic." And that particular cousin of my grandmother's, he too went to the United States, became a very successful businessman as it transpired, but he was also a very determined Irish Republican right up to the day he died. And like Mike Flannery and them, he never abandoned his ideals. And as a matter of fact, he said that the only way that England will be put out of Ireland is at the point of a bayonet. And I'm happy to say that man is a relative of mine. So there we have it. We have here this piece of skirting board, some history, some major history is attached to it, at least in relation to the people who wrote their names here. And I would dearly love to know what became of them. And this is only a piece of skirting board. It's only 2 foot long and a few inches wide, and yet is a hidden mystery, something that has been nailed to the wall of a house for 80 years in Sandymount in Dublin City. And For 20 years it was up here in Tyrone, and now it's going back to the National Museum, and now it is becoming public for the first time, 100 years almost to the day after it was first produced. So I think there's something quite wonderful about that. And I have been entrusted with this because I was an Irish Republican, I am an Irish Republican, and always will be an Irish patriot. And I feel a great empathy with these people, because I know the discrimination that I have faced all my life, right up to the very present, was endured by them and many thousands like them. But still, despite all that discrimination, the struggle continues, and the hopes and ideals of generations of our people going back for centuries remains intact. That flame is still alive, McGeough, and it will never be extinguished. So I ask you to think about these people, say a prayer for them, and let's find out what really became of them and who were they. Go to May Elliot.